Did you know that affordable energy, specifically fossil fuels, is foundational to our way of life as Canadians? Well, it is. When you think of it, from the gas pump to the grocery store, everything is really ultimately interrelated to the cost of energy, specifically fossil fuels, oil, natural gas, to be specific. So, we want to talk today about the state of energy and fossil fuels in Canada and around the world. We want to look at, frankly, the war that is against fossil fuels today. And with me here today to talk about this incredibly important topic is our guest, Mr. Gwyn Morgan, who is the former CEO of Encana.
Big topics, big ideas, and practical policy solutions. This is Leaders on the Frontier with your host, David Leis.
Gwyn Morgan devoted 3 decades to building North America's leading Encana corporation into Canada's largest energy company. It's really a remarkable story. And Gwyn has served as a director for many global corporations, including the London-based Hong Kong Bank, the world's largest global bank. He's also been recognized as Canada's leading CEO of the year. And so it's really quite an honor to have you, Gwyn, join us. So a warm welcome to you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, Gwyn, I am just very excited about our far-reaching discussion. We're going to talk a lot about energy. So, on that note, I want to ask you, as a lay person here, why is energy, specifically fossil fuels, so important to our day-to-day lives? Is there a way to kind of answer that pointed question?
Well, it's interesting when you think about the history of fossil fuels. I mean, the Industrial Revolution, the one that created basically all of the advances in the 19th century, were based upon coal, and mostly of that in England. All the great machines, everything else was coal based. But interestingly enough, then the only place that we could get liquid fuels was at that time was from the whaling industry. And it was most people don't understand that the whaling industry stopped when oil was discovered in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, amazing.
The first liquid fuels became available, and we didn't need whales. So first thing that fossil fuels did was save the whales. I guess that's a bit of an off kind of diversion, but anyway, that's so. But ever since then, it's been clear. Then once we had liquid fuels, and then eventually natural gas. There was sort of a hierarchy of fuels, and the most ones with the highest emissions, of course, are coal. Oil is number 2, and natural gas is by far the number 3 in terms of that. But they're all important, and they all have their own role, and they all can't do the same thing. So I guess you could say that oil and natural gas could do everything that coal could, but coal and natural gas have different roles.
Fossil fuels is really important, and there's no perfect energy source. You'd say that, right? Like there's always pros and cons that you have to take into account. But in case of fossil fuels, there's incredible advantages that we can manage. Is that basically what you'd say?
Well, I wouldn't say just advantages. They're as existential. You can't do without them, period. We have no other way these days of delivering what liquids fuels can deliver to our way of life, and no other way of delivering what natural gas can deliver to our. We don't have any alternatives. Yeah. There never has been. And so, as I pointed out in looking a bit of a history of energy supply in the world of different types, we just don't have anything else. And our whole way of life, and not only in the West and in the developed countries, but the undeveloped countries, their biggest problem is they don't have enough fuel.
Right.
And so the only countries that have a standard of living that we consider to be anywhere near acceptable are the ones that are able to access fossil fuels.
Okay. So why is it that there is, and we could go through this for quite some time, a whole host of policies both in Canada and around the world that are systematically taking a war on this industry? They're trying to shut it down. And in fact, you have in Canada the revelations. We'll talk about that a little bit in a moment, but the so called just transition, moving systematically away from quote oil and gas industry to something else. Like you talk about layoffs of hundreds of thousands of workers in every industry that's related to this. So why are we undertaking this war?
Well, this is a very Canadian thing you're talking about because, um, well, there even let me back up a bit on that. Let me come back to that a little bit later. I think that the big revelation that started with the Ukrainian war and is now continuing in various other ways is that Germany demonstrated that you couldn't get by with wind and solar power. They shut down
Mm, mhm.
zero emission nuclear plants. And that wasn't because of emissions, that was because of a sort of an environmental religion about, somehow we don't want any, for years it's been, we don't want any emissions from fossil fuels, but we also want to shut down the only source of zero emission, highly reliable energy. So when you try to figure that out, it leads you to try to understand the rest of it. The rest of it is that there's no the realism and the facts and the physics don't matter. I'm by the way I'm not anti-religious, but I use that term.
Yes,
So if
right.
you believe in something, um, the old thing is, I remember the great Christmas um, story about when the train goes to the Arctic, and Tom Hanks was great in it. But at the very end of it, the Polar Express, it was called. At the very very end, when the little kid gets off the train, and he goes back, this is like his dream. He's going back to his house and climbing in the window, parent, and at the very end, it said, "You can only, all you really have to do, anything is possible if you only believe." And so a lot of the people seem to be like that little kid, you know,
Mm,
it's all possible if you only believe, even
yeah.
though in the real world, in the daylight, when you're out of bed, it's not.
Wow. So there's almost this bizarre disconnect between people that are advocating with, I presume, good intentions, trying to protect the environment. We care deeply about it, but how do we also ground our feet on the reality that we are dependent on fossil fuels? And so, how do we move forward in our society and quite frankly do that industry well? Because in Canada, you'd have to say that the Canadian fossil fuel industry is really quite extraordinary. I figured this out, I believe, through my conversations with people actually in other countries, believe it or not, where they would comment regularly on how advanced our industry is. And I suspect a lot of Canadians aren't aware of that. Would you say that's a fair comment?
Well, when you're against something, it doesn't matter how advanced it is or how good it is. But I think that I want to come back to Canada a little later because that's, of course, what we want to focus on. But I guess what I'm wanted to get to is that this whole result of the Ukrainian war. It wasn't that the war itself caused this, but it wasn't long afterwards when it became evident when we needed more oil than because of reduction of supplies from Russia because of sanctions. We discovered that there wasn't enough, and so the oil price rocketed because there was so much on a knife edge. And so it turns out that people didn't realize that while we're doing all this stuff about cutting back on fossil fuels and oil, each year the world demand for oil has been going up by a million to 2 million barrels a day, and it's still
Sorry,
going up.
can you
And the
repeat that? So
IEA
the demand for this product is higher than, like, record levels. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, and it's gonna well, it is, but the International Energy Agency, who's pretty neutral on this stuff, say it's gonna keep going up. They say we're gonna keep adding another million barrels a day of demand continuously for the next several years.
And
So,
where is a lot of
so,
that
so
demand coming from, Gwen?
well, so here's the point. What, but when we started to put sanctions around Russia and reduce their oil supply, we discovered that there wasn't enough oil without their oil.
Hmm.
So in other words, Russia has become the swing producer for oil supply in the world. And that's a revelation that most people didn't have any clue about, including myself, by the way. So now we have, reality is that we need Russian oil. And that's OPEC is already wide open. They're looking at doing some more drilling and trying, but they just weren't wide open. So here we had a situation where, and have a situation where Putin is the swing. They're one of the major members of what's called OPEC Plus, which is original OPEC Plus, a few others, and they have become the swing producer. In other words, if they and therefore they control the world oil price. And then here we had, and I'll just carry on with this for a bit because it's a bit of these are connected items. Here we have China, which is saying that they're by far the highest emitting emissions country in the world. But President Xi says, "Oh well, we're gonna cut back and we're gonna reduce our coal demand and we're going to be on that. You go to the COP meetings, we're going to be really cutting back." And meanwhile, he's got 200 coal-fired plants under construction today.
200
200,
coal plants.
and they're already producing like 60 to 70% of world emissions. So this is a game of bait and switch with these guys. So what we then have, here's a situation. Let me go further to this. Picture this now. You got China, who's meeting every item they produce is much more intensive, energy intensive, emissions intensive than in North America or Europe, the developed countries, much more. And yet, what are we doing? We're putting both in Canada and elsewhere, putting taxes on our emissions, on our use of fossil fuels. We're having, besides the direct carbon taxes, we're implementing other things that make it awfully difficult to basically manufacture anything here. In fact, it's gotten to the point where virtually none of our manufacturers, or almost none, can compete with what's being produced by Xi's China. So here we are, basically killing our industries that consume fossil fuels here in a much more efficient and less emissions intensive way, and handing the market for those same manufactured goods to China. So here's the sort of summary of this theme I'm on right now, and I'll move on to whatever else you get to. That who could have ever believed that the whole attempt to bring the West off fossil fuels has resulted in the following. It resulted in a despot being in control of the oil market, and another despot be in charge of virtually all our manufactured goods, and killing our own ability and our jobs to manufacture here.
Yeah.
That's the legacy of the green movement. And I'm not saying I'm not happy about this, obviously.
Mhm.
But it's a reality that people don't seem to want to face, that we've empowered Putin and Xi, two despots, to be dependent on them and killing our jobs and 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 our industry here.
Wow. So the irony is that the green movement, regardless of whether you think they have good intentions or not, has ended up pursuing the death of a fossil fuel industry that's critical to our way of life. And right now, we don't have frankly, a viable alternative, despite what Greta Thunberg might say. But what you're saying, Gwen, is that we've empowered really foreign adversaries, namely China and Russia, and we can't manufacture as many things here because we're doing that. Is that right?
Well, not only have we done that, but in the case of China, everything we buy from them, because we can't afford to produce it here, has probably 2 to 3 times as much emissions intensity
Mm-hmm.
as the same product if it were manufactured at home. So, but that's reality, and we've created that. The green movement and all of this stuff. And when I write columns about this, and they all say I'm the old oil and gas guy and don't care about anything else. I care about everything else,
Mm-hmm.
but I also care about facts and information.
Exactly.
And we've got China empowered to have us by the short hairs, if I could put it that way. And we're buying stuff because we can't do it at home that produces a hell of a lot more energy, and we're shutting our own manufacturers down who could do it much more efficiently and more environmentally
Yeah.
sensitive. That's reality.
So just to illustrate that reality a little bit more, is it correct that China and dare I say India, let alone Russia, I believe, they're not signatories to all these quote ambitious environmental agreements that you see all these people flying into with their private jets to Scotland and other locations? They're not signatories to those agreements, are they, Gwen?
No. China goes to COP26. Russia goes to COP26, COP27, all the COP meetings. They all make. I mean, they go there and they say. That's what I said earlier. Xi went to sent his guys there or his people there, and they made great promises and how they're going to cut everything back. Well,
But they're not signed on to the
they
agreement.
fly home and start building more coal-fired plants. So they're there. But it was interesting in one of the last COP meetings, they had a resolution that this is the conference of the parties, by the way, for global warming. But they had one of their people came there and said, well, we're going to do all this. But then they presented a resolution to phase out fossil fuels over the next 20 years, and China wouldn't sign it. So they couldn't pass it. But anyway, they go, but it's all window dressing.
Okay. So I do want to recap a little bit then incisively the state of Canadian energy. So if we had to summarize it up, the energy scene, because the demand for fossil fuels is so high and getting higher every year, how would you describe the state of Canadian energy in a nutshell now?
We have the third largest oil reserves in the world. We have incredibly large falling resources of natural gas, and our natural gas, by the way, is produced in such a environmentally sensitive, clean way, and but we can't get, just like oil, we can't get oil on a pipeline built because every time we try, the U.S. The federal government sort of makes sure it doesn't happen one way or another, and we have such arduous regulations and procedures for anything like building a gas pipeline to Tidewater and building a LNG plant that trying to get it out of the country. The one we have right now started 15 years ago, and we're just getting finished with it right now. So
now, which one is that? The Trans Mountain project?
Yeah, that's the Canada, LNG Canada, which has got mostly a Shell and others in it.
Mm-hmm.
So there was 19 other projects, by the way, but they all couldn't make it because of procedures. Combination.
So you said, well, let's just hold on for a sec. We want to bury that headline. 19 projects were
Yeah,
under consideration. I think people will be shocked to hear that.
yeah, there were 19,
19 pipeline projects to the West Coast.
but they never made it because the people just gave up because the procedures we couldn't. There was a comedy, the regulatory procedures, the bureaucracy, the sort of general, sort of in the background anti-fossil fuel. There was a combination of that, and of course the Aboriginal, or in some cases Aboriginal objections, and the whole combination of things is a sort of a toxic soup for getting anything done in this country.
Okay, so part of the reality is that the demand for fossil fuels has never been higher, it continues to climb, and yet Canada can't seem to get things done because of the regulatory state of affairs. And
Yeah, and
this
interesting
impacts
about
people.
natural gas is so. What's really interesting about natural gas is that there, if we were, if the natural gas market in the world was fully supplied with all its need, um, and it would actually, in a lot of ways, we'd be able to replace uh, liquid fuels. And there's nothing more, no more, nothing more we can do realistically instead of these sort of pipe dreams that people have, uh, than to increase the use of natural gas.
Wow.
Um, I mean, I tell people a story about when we started our company way back in '75, and I had these, we were drilling all these wells, and they were small production, but continue. They had good sustainability, um, and the trucks we had, the field trucks, all the field operators that drive around the field and service these wells, um, ran on natural gas in 1976.
Wow.
And all they had to do, they also had uh, gasoline tanks, of course. And when the pressure in the gas tank went down, they just turned over a switch inside the cab, and the engine kept running on gasoline. So the idea of natural gas fueled automobiles goes back. Uh, we were doing it in 1976.
Isn't that great history?
Because of the internal combustion engines don't care which it is,
Hmm.
gasoline cars. And so this is a huge opportunity to, rather than trying to spend money on battery cars and all the toxic mining and stuff associated with it and the cost, we could make a lot of things by, of course, easing the shortage of oil and increasing the demand for natural gas and the cleanest
Wow.
fuel there is.
So if you were to look at the state of Canada's energy then, and all these policies that are designed to undermine it and put people frankly, put them to be unemployed, um, how's the industry responding? Like, what's going on now as you look at the field? How is the industry responding in Canada to all this, frankly, war that it's experiencing?
Well, what's really interesting about this whole situation is that it's unique to Canada. Nobody else has got the environmental extremism that the Trudeau government has. Nobody, no other country. The most of them have realized, including Europe,
Huh.
which were on a previously different page, have realized that we need to have fossil fuels, and we
Sorry,
need to.
Canada is a loner on this front? Like, we're
Absolutely. We're,
all
we're
this
the
self-inflicted pain?
we're the only ones that haven't realized that we can't get by without fossil fuels. Europe was the last one to realize that, but they got a huge, very difficult lesson. And so, and the U.S., they have their emissions controls, but the natural gas production and exports in the U.S. has skyrocketed because there's a market there.
Because it's
And
never been higher, right?
yeah,
Again, it's never been
high.
higher.
So the only country that is uh, philosophically, or whatever you want to use the term, opposed and not being realistic about the future of
Mhm.
fuels and the impossibility of wind and solar supplying everything, which is ironic because we're one of the coldest countries in the world. um, is the Trudeau government. So it's a unique thing, but it's like they just don't hear. It doesn't matter. We are going to, you talked about this earlier, but we're going to take oil and gas industry people and retrain them. Retrain them.
The just transition.
Yeah, but you know what that sounds like? It sounds like something you would have expected at a communist China under Xi.
Okay.
Wow.
Right.
I mean, really, I'm not being exaggerating. When you tell people who are producing something that they're good at it, and it's their career, and it's their job, and it's their future, and their whole world.
Well, their families.
We're going to stop you from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that came out of the Trudeau's, was something to, there's lots of good janitorial jobs, and it's so astounding that this could be happening in our country. And what's even more astounding is that Canadians don't seem to understand it. This just transition. If you went to Ontario and told we're going to have a just transition for the auto industry, we're going to take everybody that engineers and designs and produces the auto cars and retrain you. What would happen? Well, you know what would happen. But it's happening today. At least it's been proposed.
Well, thank you so much, Gwyn, and all the very best to you and your family. Well, and thank you to all of you who've joined us as that brings to a close our discussion with Gwyn Morgan about the state of energy in Canada and the world. We want to welcome your feedback and your comments, and we certainly invite you to continue to be involved in Frontier. Be sure to check out our website at www.fcpp.org and sign up for our newsletter.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.